Hello everyone, today we talk about Mughal armored elephants. I'm sure it's plenty of videos about that topic everywhere on the internet today. However, for the sake of completeness of our channel, we talk a little bit about them, so we're gonna maybe add a bit of context and other reasons, generally speaking, in military logics relatively to the development of elephant warfare into. It sounds fine, elephant warfare. It sounds like armies of elephants clashing against each other, which was actually the case in India, not just in the modern era, but also medieval, since ancient times actually. And naturally also considering their armor, why it developed in that way, how the elephants were practically used into action, and what were capable of, because sometimes there are also some misconceptions relatively to the usage of such mounted troops. For instance, the logistical use of elephants is sometimes, at least, underestimated in the face of the general idea of the shock charge of the elephants. And talking about Mughal, I know in English you pronounce sometimes Mughal, Mughal or something like that. I say Mughal, so if it sounds bad, I'm sorry. um, but we're talking about the same thing. This is the important thing. So Mughal history, as you know, starts in the 16th century as this Muslim invasion of India by Babur's army. Mughal warfare is essentially something very complex, and in in parallel with the complexity of Mughal culture. The Mughal Empire wasn't properly Indian one. It was a sort of Persian Indian empire. There were many syncretic aspects. If you take, I don't know, in armor, everything, there are great influences, and that were already part not just of the meeting with Babur's army with the Indian subcontinent cultures, but it was part of a broader world of material culture that kind of stretched, historically speaking, since the times actually of the Mongolian invasions of Asia, of southern Asia, and that had kind of survived into this. Babur was descendant of Tamerlan, hence of the first Mongols in turn, and the Mongols really blended together much of the local Asian military cultures, and produced a synthesis that eventually in turn again differentiated in the alveum of the local traditions and identities, but definitely also maintaining something in common among these. Um, so it's very interesting to consider it in this way. And definitely the Babur's armies that came from the Central Asia proper, not from the south, kind of Indianized, obviously, with the invasion of the Indian subcontinent. And one of the major characteristics there that Babur's military got from the Indians was definitely the use of war elephants into warfare. As I was saying before, elephant warfare is something that dates back to the ancient history, so there is this evident nature of elephants as very big animals with a resistant skin. The elephant, this is kind of sad, but the elephant is by nature a very peaceful being, and a war elephant is essentially something transformed from this. I mean, the war elephants were supposedly trained being kept in captivity and getting angered, and suffering and getting this aggressive mindset against their own species, and as well as towards humans for an effective usage into warfare. And the Indian subcontinent has always had this huge amount of elephants that, in this sense, were a quite easy resource to find, and that doesn't mean that the elephant in itself didn't cost resources in turn, because the elephant consumes a huge amount of food. The same Babur noticed that basically an elephant ate the same volume of food as 15 camels, that are already pretty, just like horses, pretty consuming in terms of resources. It's also interesting to see these huge empires, how they used actually several types of animals inhabiting into different areas of the empire. So the camel was something typically coming from especially from the Arab military since the origins. The camel is an extremely is a resistance animal that can be used into the desert, as well as into cold mountains, to a certain extent at least. The elephant has naturally a quite evidently shocking power, and shock power, again, physically speaking, as for the sheer mass and the impact that it can produce against the enemy ranks. And the amount of the elephants in the Mughals armies from the time of Babur increased, seemingly reaching the peak in the late 16th century. We have evidence of several hundreds of elephants. The actual without even if you look at medieval times before the Mongols, the Indian the Indian powers like had already made a very extensive usage of these animals into warfare. Obviously, in the 6th century, a small ruler of the Indian subcontinent could field maybe even several hundreds of war elephants. The Delhi Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq of the first half of the 14th century is said to have possessed 3,000. Then Sher Shah Sur, who governed Delhi in between 1540 and 45, owned allegedly 5,000 elephants. Already, so we are already in the Mughal era. Emperor Akbar, who ruled from 1556 to 1705, kept 6,000 war elephants, or at least 6,000 elephants, a part of which was war elephants, or probably turned in some measure. In 30s of the 18th century, Nizam ul Mulk, who ruled between 1724 and 48 of Hyderabad, had over 1,000 war elephants, including almost one fourth armored. So this is also an interesting balance, also considering the relation between, for instance, in the rest of cavalry, between horses which were much more rarely, proportionally speaking, armored in this considering this ratio. We also know that the Mughal army possessed 2,000 elephants in 1739. So you understand that And we have more difficulty though at understanding how many of them were actually armored, which is probably not extremely important in the sense that it's obvious that you're gonna have an elite among not just among elephants but among just for any other troop, other their cavalry or with armored cavalry or men that are covered in iron armor, and I mean the however the important aspect of that, aside from having an elite troops, to be used effectively, is that more importantly it's really the tactical combinations that you can have between elite shock troops and lighter troops um, in together on the battlefield that really counts. Everybody would have liked to have armored um, an all armored army of thousands, let's say, but that was simply economically not possible, and even certain crucial tactical roles cannot be performed by heavily armored troops. Sometimes I use the metaphor of owning a private jet relatively to a single individual who, say, in the Middle Ages or in the modern era, could field an armored, a full armor for just for the for himself. In terms of comparison with modern availability of resources, the you can imagine what it meant to have an armored horse or an an armored elephant. I mean, it's like owning and having the resources maybe to build a skyscraper. A huge cost, and therefore it's interesting to see it sometimes. Such proportions of armored elephants that were relatively difficult to take down, at least into the Indian warfare proper, but because obviously this eventually was influenced by Western military tactics and technologies, and therefore progressively also the usage of elephants in warfare kind of declined. Even though you can find elephants being used among the I don't know, the British colonial troops even during World War II, something like that. I mean, but obviously with a certain degree of maybe of exasperation of and fantasy of invention, let's say, from the relative soldiers. Um, the 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 idea is that why eventually the usage of elephants declined. Well, first of all, the answer is firearms, and seemingly firearms can really scare the elephants. We have the evidence from the the from the early 18th century, into which Nizam ul Mulk lined up 225 elephants in front of his guns to test them, essentially. And after one volley, most of the elephants began to run away for miles, and they trampled 306 unfortunate infantrymen in their rush. This tells you how frightened could the elephants really be. An anecdote is also very meaningful, relatively to the actual acknowledgement of the problem. I mean, this guy was practically testing the the eventual the what these elephants would have reacted by. The so there was definitely the acknowledgement in the early 18th century with Western warfare and firearms, by the way, were also quite developed into India in itself, because definitely the Indians had developed their own firearms on their own. But let's say that pike and shot, let's say at this point, in linear tactics that were created into the 18th century, definitely into Western warfare, were more advanced into than the local ones of India, at least seemingly, because there is generally this stereotype that the East had was backwards compared to Europe relatively to the development of firearms. With the Ottomans, it's actually not true. At least up to the 18th century, the Ottoman firearms were actually excellent, also in terms of the quality of gunpowder and all. Then things collapsed in the 18th century because of the collapse of the same Ottoman Empire in practice, in the implosion at least, because the Ottoman Empire survived throughout 2 centuries. But generally speaking, when we think about India or China, we had the impression that eventually the Europeans arrived into those areas, and the local um, armies were kind of backwards. But this is not truly true. Probably, however, European artillery, and especially and firearms, and especially tactics, were growing to be substantially effective, especially in pitched battles in open field. By the way, at this time, the greatest power on the earth was King China. So it's not that the Europeans up to the 18th century were actually the most advanced armies in the world. Um, uh, but simply, since we are talking about elephant warfare, the development of firearms could be very crucial in fencing these animals off on the battlefield. Um, so that was one reason, obviously. Um, However, there is also another consideration, that is that firearms were used, as a matter of fact, also by the Indians, and certain musketeers were mounted also actually over the same elephants. So the idea is that elephants, just like other animals, can get used to such sounds, battle noise, let's say. It can be very intense indeed, and by the way, you can train animals to be in this fashion. I mean, this is what was done with horses too. So you place them in front of artillery, you start firing, and you see how they react. I mean, they're obviously going to be scared, but with training they can get used to that. In ancient times, that was done with, I don't know, playing trumpets, doing something like that. So this is very this is very well known in practice. And mm, the idea is that the elephant, however, with artillery, can also be targeted quite easily. I mean, the elephant is a pretty big and easy target, and especially if you shoot with a cannon over the elephant, you're gonna practically destroy him and cause also a bit of a mess in practice within the same lines. So they're very easy to target in this sense, and they can run amok and create problems also for their own armies. Equally exposed were the crews of these elephants. The reason for which why is this thing clicking now? I don't know. Um, the crews were defended by extra elephant armor that was conceived to shield them. For instance, also an elephant armor could have even the ears protected, because these also partly shielded the mahout. Um, and the um, especially when there is a commander that is standing over the elephant. The Europeans that were fighting in South Asia in the 18th century immediately realized that shooting at that could be really the best way to solve to solve practically the fight. And this is not surprising. I mean, to see that the 18th century was basically the last moment into which you see the gradual and definitive decline of war elephants into Indian warfare, um, which is very meaningful also because the 18th century is the century of eventually um, um, of the were conquered. I mean, the India was conquered by the British. But I was reading now here that you can, however, shoot an elephant also in some parts that are crucial for them. And even though sometimes it took literally hundreds of bullets to hit the elephant to kill it. So very sad things and very you know, one thing is two men killing each other. One thing is these poor animals being slaughtered in this fashion. I'm quite sensible to the matter. So and the so the idea is, however, that the elephant can be used practically also in other fashions rather than just fighting. So an elephant can carry, for instance, just in logistical terms, as a matter of supplies, can carry loads up to half of a ton, mm, even though for relatively short distances. So you have to take that into consideration, even as a strategical factor of using these elephants and all. Sometimes the elephants could even be used, however, to attack fortifications. Yes, we have evidence, especially um, the of elephants that were trained to practically take down certain fortifications, like with bricks and all, with their um, they could definitely first of all, an elephant is very good as a at hammering an enemy gate, for instance, if it is not to resistance. But there can be also very um, a very active, very dynamic use of the elephant's trunk in order to, for instance, to literally, I don't know how to say that, to catch, even, first of all, to disrupt enemy ramparts. That can be done, or even lifting a horse and rider and smashing them onto the ground, as it is recorded sometimes in the sources. And Babur, therefore the first Mughal emperor, is declared that two or three elephants could haul a huge cats and bombard that would have otherwise needed like several hundreds men to be carried. At the same time, you have to realize that elephants do eat a lot. So that is also a logistical concern that you have to keep in mind. Yet they can be used for these works. I mean, India was built partly thanks to the elephant's force, working force, and therefore it can be a very resourceful animal in many ways. And the interesting thing, however, and that is about the title, about India, is this presence of armored elephants. Now, before we said that sometimes the sources claimed that there was pretty high ratio of armored elephants compared to the unarmored ones. However, you have to think that, as we were saying, it was something extremely costly, something extremely expensive. And it does seem, generally speaking, like for other armored animals that they weren't used pretty much in India, like within India, like elsewhere in practice. We have extensive evidence of fully covered Mughal elephants, war elephants, while others were protected seemingly only over their they had only their heads and parts of trunks covered and protected. Others, even the personal kings, elephants, didn't wear any armor, not even in battle. So this is really that really depends probably also on the mobility and all, because I believe that even if you are an elephant, it's pretty hard to have armor on your on your shoulders. And there was probably also a huge variety in terms of how the armor was practically made. Here there was no standardization. We have, starting from the material, usually we can make a standard. It was standard armor, like let's say in steel scale, sewed onto layers of cloth of layer, just like for other how for man armor, and but they could also be into made of big plates and mail, and other could be simply quilted cloth or leather practice. So you understand that there was the same kind of gradation, let's say, you can find into horse armor or human armor. And relatively to the trunk, there was sometimes the so-called tusk knife that was basically um, to for killing for killing enemies, of course. And usually the trunk was never covered with armor. First of all, for the sake of mobility, and because it could naturally, the elephants could hit enemies with that, so it would have made no much sense to cover it and to basically hamper its slashing, let's say, hitting potential in practice. The the elephant crews, let's talk about them, were sometimes were equally armored. As you can see here in the picture, they could be actually armed with several types of weaponry. There is a not really a great probably a great diversity in terms of how these um, the these guys could be actually equipped with. By the way, relatively to the trunk, I forgot to say that sometimes today with the tusk swords and knives, that were quite great weapons to attack to an elephant trunk. There could be any other type of swords, sheets, maces, scraps of chain. So there was actually a lot of um, a lot of different type of combinations that you could find. The relatively to the crews, however, they were also equipped with mail clad sometimes. Otherwise, could be even not protected, depended probably on the grade of on how the same elephant was what it was conceived for, tactically speaking, because mobility is always an important point relatively to tactical effectiveness. So even the crews could, in this sense, be more or less equipped. They usually, however, were armed with lances, bows, swords, shields, as well as firearms, as we were calling before. Usually, the um, the here I keep get clicks, and I don't understand why. Let's let's set things a little better. Okay. So relatively to this, the crews usually rode the elephant. Mm. Just this happened all the times. In previous times, previously to the modern age, usually there were also certain fighting towers practically, but in times of Mughal, by the time of the Mughals, these towers basically disappeared. Otherwise, there was the so-called howdah, I believe, it is called, which is a sort of carriage that is placed over the elephant, on the back of the elephant. But it could be also placed on other animals like camels. I mean, there were obviously different types, and it was used by either usually by wealthy people for either for hunting or in warfare. That sometimes, by the way, are two very similar activities in practice. Um, the howdah could lodge even three men in it, and there could be banners attached to each to the corners, and sometimes the Auda could also lodge a sort of big sling. mm, Even with they could shoot bullets as big as eggs, like or a great tennis ball. So it's very interesting to see how warfare gets, how many adaptations you could find, and how dynamic even these and offensive even, and not just and offensive could be these war elephants combined with their crews. Um, the so it was also very dangerous to approach the elephant in itself. I mean, the cavalry is usually something that as an arm that cannot defend, because if you are on horseback, objectively, yes, you can have our bows and all, but that's still a miserable. No, I mean, it's better to run away if you're attacked, and you have to stay still in practice. Before attacking an elephant, you should wait a little bit, because with a sword sticking out of his trunk and slashing in front of him, and with a crew that can shoot you up with a musket and all, it's pretty, and just the intimidating figure of the animal itself, all covered in armor and all. It's something you probably don't will make you reconsider a very hasty attack on these things, because you can easily be slaughtered even before you approach these animals. And by the way, that also witnesses the really the dynamic use that was done of them. I mean, if properly placed, they could be a sort of mobile artillery. Actually, I saw in several times, let's say, portable artillery mounted over camels, mounted over elephants. I mean, this wasn't really the rule for evident reasons, but the idea is that you can invent many different usages and to really combine this relatively to your tactical needs with other troops on the battlefield. And even for operations that are not strictly pitch battles, I mean, this can be, I mean, placing an elephant over the top of a hill somewhere and having guys shooting down, maybe supported with some other infantry, can be sort of fortress in practice. I don't want to exaggerate the concept, but these are things that did definitely happen. Or maybe to guard a bridge pass or something like that. It could really be done, and there are also other rational factors or cultural ones that, however, could maybe prevent you from attacking the elephant because you simply were scared, or maybe you, I don't know, in Indian military culture, what relatively to elephants, what kind of let's say psychological approach there was to certain war animals also um, in their majesty in terms of the role that animals often have in, I don't know, in religions, in cultures, and all relatively to their identity, their spirits, the divinities are connected to them. Even in a context maybe where you're Muslim, because there was many syncretism practically into India, just today, as you can imagine, also how it was at that time. The the idea is that army commanders in India had to be mounted over elephants. And this is why the Europeans spotted that and kind of took it as as easy targets for beheading the army, let's say, by killing the guy. And definitely the elephant has also these characteristics. You can, sitting on its top, you can really see a lot. And usually, I mean, it's not a couple of meters of elephants that eventually solve tactical or strategical problems by looking at distance. It's obvious that reliefs and other elevated positions are accessible and doesn't. But tactically speaking, having looking things from the above is really can be really interesting at small units level, and it can be it could be a good spotting. Observation. It can be a very good observation point. Also to watch. I don't know if the how the fight maybe is in a pitched battle, how the fight is proceeding uh, all over the line. If you are in the first line, that is something you don't always have if you are in on a flat land like the one in which usually pitched battles are fought. So that is also a factor, and that was the reason by why why army commanders were placed on elephants. Um, that also can be aside from visibility, that can be really also a good signaling point. Mm. You can signal many things even at a distance because you are elevated, so people can see you at the distance, even if the what is happening down is like the mass of a battle. So you can elevate above that. Um, the um, the idea is also that, however, this was a problem because many battles were definitely settled by the killing of commanders that were on the top of the elephants. So hence the necessity of having this extra steel armor in the front to defend the guys that were at the top. Um, the elephants also um, can be quite loud in his sounds. I mean, the elephant the elephant trumpeting, let's say, is very very intimidating. Think about before we listed these thousands of elephants sometimes that were used to battle. Just imagine this animals trumpeting all at once. It must be a terrifying noise, and those are things that tactically speaking, psychologically speaking, can be very very important as factors. Relatively to this, um, there was also some innovation definitely that the Mughals brought to India, to the uh, Indian warfare, in the sense that before we mentioned the turrets that were something that basically disappeared. Why did they disappear? I don't know. Probably it could be that if the Mughal Empire was something much more centralized, armies were much larger. Probably the if you have a turret, it sounds as if also there's a more of I'm just speculating now, but it's as if there was a sort of more static fight. I mean, all these. Uh, this is just pure speculation, but first of all, the turret has a weight. It doesn't allow a great interaction between the crew and the guys that maybe can approach the elephant. I mean, if you are just riding on the elephant's back without any like kneeling or sitting like here in the picture, you see that length. Well, you can easily fence off the enemies. While if you're on a turret, you have to expose to I mean to move more cumbersomely in some way. So to me, the idea is probably that the Mughal kind of dynamicized also the same elephant warfare in some measure, because they could field more elephants at once. So they could, in this sense, use more combined tactics into which mobility was more preferable, and therefore the elephant had to be lighter in some measure, and the guys at the top to be more reactive, more capable of defending the same animal, by the way, because once the animal is taken down, you're also gonna fall. So it's basically up to you in a certain fashion. You see here this beautiful neck throat protection of the elephant. That is quite interesting, because that was definitely also a vital point. So that is just my interpretation, but I don't know how correct it is. By the way, I don't know how much elephant turrets were actually used in the past, how frequently, because elephant warfare in India is something millenary, so and probably also very diversified according to the areas of the subcontinent. So I don't want to get into things I don't really know. Not even by speculation, and all the various possibilities. So it's obvious also that the armor was worn just for the more valuable elephants in practice, which is pretty obvious. But this could mean that there was a differentiation, just like with horses. I mean, that certain elephants were better for running, for mobility, for moving. The armored elephants were instead more meant for shock, but for to also for a shorter time of engagement, because they could get fatigued much more quickly. So also elephants differed one from the others. The I believe that this is we can also pass to describe this picture in practice. This is an elephant armor from roughly the year 600, just giving a standard year, more or less around between the end of the 16th and beginning of the 17th century. And you see here practically 8 parts. There are three at either side of the body, and one each for the head and throat, and we have a few that actually survive for this model, um, and this armor could weigh something like 150 kilos. So just think of what that means. I mean, usually um, a guy's armor could be like substantially 7 times less. So this elephant makes for 7, and is not even fully armored. Mm. So just imagine of the actual quantity of metal that also serves that also is needed to fully protect an elephant in theory. Um, the So it is, and I don't know how much to add to this, because this is not really about elephant tactics in practice, but I think elephant warfare is very fascinating, because um, these things were really meant to go crash into enemy formations, and this is something that happened since ancient times. um, the Indians were mastering these tactics because they had a huge load of a huge lot of elephants. Sometimes in the ancient world, you realize that among, I don't know, peace conditions, peace treaties, the elephant powers gave in turn to, like, if you take the successor states, the successors of Alexander the Great that bordered with India, like the Seleucids, they gave elephants in exchange, and that's why you could see Indian elephants into the west, together with the other instead African races that the Carthaginians and the Ptolemies were using. The Ptolemies did also use Indian elephants. They were a bit more, a cross between Africa and Asia. So, but the interesting thing about these animals is that, first of all, they were used in few numbers. So actually, the Indian warfare is quite interesting, because you see huge amounts of war elephants. So in a tactical context that is very, very different from what you see from, I don't know, the rest of the ancient world, where these elephants were, when elephants were used in the West. The I think that I don't know how really elephants behave when they are into masses of hundreds of them. I know for sure that in the ancient world, charges were done. Essentially, that elephants usually go in a row, like, so. The question is, how do you make an elephant charging the enemy? Because elephants are a bit different from horses. They have a different, and they also have a different purpose in practice. They're also more less agile. So basically, an elephant charge has to rely on a straight line and making the elephants following that. Well, a very nice thing, let's say nice, it's a funny thing to do, was to place a I don't know how to say that in English, but I'm searching for the term. The Yes, they placed at the top of the row a female elephant in heat. Hmm? And all the other elephants following the row were males. So it was enough basically to make proceed the female straight ahead, that all the males would follow her, and therefore you could maintain the line, you could maintain the elephant charge ordered. It kind of sounds funny though. tragicity of the of warfare, that this was the actual mechanism, and that could practically make the charge done straight into the enemy. This is how Hannibal, I don't know, used his Carthaginian elephants, and that can have devastating effects. Also, because the only way basically you have to kill the animal is hitting it in a few vital points, usually sticking a lance in in its backside, which is very sad. But this is how I don't know, the Roman Velites were able, for instance, to take out the Carthaginian elephants. So I guess, by the way, that I don't know actually about butt protection of this of this Mughal um, elephants, but I also think that this could be just theoretical, especially because I don't know, by the way, in Mughal tactics, how complex were really elephant maneuvers, especially when you have lots of elephants. My idea is that they were probably um, relatively simple, at least the more the greater the number really was, then probably elephant warfare is pretty much the same for smaller numbers. And as I was saying, maybe a single individual elephant could be used also outside of open field, just to do other things, carrying out other offensive actions, more surgically in practice, or just for logistical means and stuff like that. So just for saying that this was what India was able to field at the time, and it's a pity we don't know much more than this. I like very much this picture. You can see here, I don't know if you can say it clearly, but basically all these, between all these stripes that you see here, kind of like that are really the um, um, the attaching points of the various plates of lamellar armor. So these joints, you can see all the lamellae here, and these were pretty effective armor, and definitely this was an elite armor for the elephant. And yeah, I don't add more because I'm not even sure about the amount of stupid things that I could have that I that I came up with about elephant warfare, about which I don't know admittedly very much, but nevertheless I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or just subscribe to my channel to receive further news about my contents. And for now, thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye!